Telescope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. This evening, our guest will be Professor Murat Somer, joining us to speak about the retired admiral's open letter to the government, expressing their concern over Ankara's intention to build Kanal Istanbul and its implications for the Montreux Treaty. But first, let's begin our bulletin with the latest numbers relating to the pandemic. Record high case numbers continue to increase across Turkey.
According to the data released by the Ministry of Health, the daily number of new cases on April 8th has been announced as 55,941 and the number of deaths as 258. These numbers have led to the total number of cases to reach 3,689,866 and the death toll to become 33,201.
An open letter signed by 104 retired admirals was released late on April 3rd. In the letter, the admirals said it was worrying to open the Montreux Convention, the international treaty regulating the status of the Turkish Straits, up to debate as part of talks on Kanal Istanbul.
The letter expressed concern over Ankara's intention to build Kanal Istanbul, an artificial canal project that aims to connect the Black Sea north of Istanbul to the Marmara Sea to the south. The controversial project has triggered a debate on the revision of the 1936 Montreux Convention. The Montreux Convention guarantees the free passage through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles Straits of civilian vessels in times of both peace and war. It also regulates the use of the straits by military vessels from non-Black Sea countries. Once completed, Kanal Istanbul, dubbed as one of President Erdogan's crazy projects, will provide a shorter way for naval vessels from non-Black Sea countries to reach the Black Sea, so long as they pay the necessary fees. Erdogan believes that the canal will ease shipping traffic on the Bosphorus Strait, one of the world's busiest maritime passages, and prevent accidents. President Erdogan stated that they will hold a tender for Kanal Istanbul and lay the groundwork for it in the summer. President Erdogan has previously stated that the Montreux Convention will not be binding for Kanal Istanbul. If a need arises in the future, we won't hesitate to review any convention to make our country have a better one, Erdogan had said. In this context, the Admiral's letter praised the Montreux Convention, urging the government to refrain from opening it to debate. We are of the opinion that all kinds of statements and actions that can make the Montreux Convention, which holds a significant place in Turkey's survival, a subject of debate or put it onto the table should be avoided, the letter said. The retired admirals further stated the army should stick to the Turkish Republic's founding principles and the contemporary route drawn by its founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The declaration also mentions leaked photos showing Rear Admiral Mehmet Sarı in Islamic clothes in a home together with the members of who are said to be the members of a pro-government religious group. The letter was condemned by the presidential office. Due to Turkey's history of repeated military coups, the admirals have been accused of implicitly threatening the government with a coup. Since then, a judicial investigation has been launched and 10 admirals have been detained. Those detained include Cem Gürdeniz, the name behind Turkey's controversial Blue Homeland doctrine, which claims vast sections of the Mediterranean and Aegean and its undersea energy deposits. The concept is at odds with Greece and Cyprus's claims in the region. Prosecutors also ordered 4 other suspects to report to Ankara police within 3 days, opting not to detain them because of their age. The former senior military leaders are accused of using force and violence to get rid of the constitutional order. Erdogan addressed a letter on April 5th, stating that the letter could not be labeled as freedom of speech and had malevolent coup implications. He added his administration had no plans to pull out of the Montreux Convention. The letter has led to mixed reactions within the opposition parties. While some opposition politicians say that the government is using the declaration to distract the public from the country's real problems, others have taken side with the admirals. Several senior figures of the main opposition, Republican People's Party, announced support for the retired officers, saying that they offered patriotic criticism and exercised their freedom of expression. However, CHP Chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and spokesperson Faik Öztrak called the debate a fake agenda meant to distract the public from the real problems. Good Party Chair Meral Akşener slammed the letter by the admirals, calling it nonsense talk. Akşener said that the statement served the government, allowing them to divert public attention from the problems of the country. She added, the fact that the declaration was released at midnight resembled coup memorandums, and this gave the government the opportunity to stamp on it.
Our guest this evening is Professor Murat Somer. Professor Somer is a faculty member at the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Koç University.
Hello, Professor Somer. Thank you so much for having joined us today.
Hello, merhaba. Happy to be here.
So the letter, the open letter by the 104 retired admirals released earlier this week, has prompted government members and pro-government media to depict the letter as a veiled threat of a coup, while others have assessed it in terms of freedom of speech. How do you evaluate this letter, Professor? Do you sense there's a coup insinuation from this statement, given the history of military coups in Turkey?
No, not necessarily. Legally speaking, I think I can safely say definitely no. There is no invitation to violence or to a coup in this statement, in this letter. There is no hate speech. We can see this yet another example in recent times by the AKP government to weaponize the law and to use the law differently for the supporters and critiques of the government. For the supporters of the government, the law is often used as an immunity, as a protection or shield, and against the critiques of the government, it is used as a weapon to punish the critics. So we can see it this way. To establish any claim of a coup threat, the prosecutors would find any material evidence between this letter and any plotted coup, and they would be very hard-pressed to find this kind of evidence because the admirals are retired. They don't have any material connection. They don't have the authority actually to really to do this. Politically speaking, one could criticize the tone, timing, and medium of this letter in light of Turkey's history of military coups and attempted coups. Having said that, we should also remember actually that during AKP governments, Turkey also has a history of civilian coups against the government. We may remember that during the 2000s, the AKP government and its ally, the Gülenist ally, had accused the military of plotting a coup based on fabricated evidence. And all of these officers were later acquitted, but this was used to purge secularist officers from the military and to weaken the military politically. And recently, after this letter was announced, there have been some claims by the military officers that there is some kind of a full play in this announcement of this letter, because they claim that they approved the letter, but they did not approve the timing of this letter being announced late at night, resembling some kind of a coup threat, and also the medium that it was first, I think, published in a extreme nationalist website with not the stellar reputation. So they say that they did not know, so this was not really agreed upon. So these are all, of course, right now claims. But so we should remember that politically speaking, we could interpret actually what is happening here, and also in light of the fact that immediately after this announcement of this letter, the government began to use the letter to really accuse them of plotting a coup, and also not only them personally, but also the whole opposition. Not the whole opposition, but in a way dividing the opposition, the main opposition party. They immediately began to claim that they have something to do with the letter, etc. And one other political aspect of this message, of this letter, is that it seems to indicate at least a partial breakup of yet another partnership by Erdogan, because many of these I think we can call secular patriotic officers had been quite supportive of the government since 2016, and people were talking about some kind of an alliance between Erdogan and this patriotic camp. And now, of course, they turned critical of Erdogan. But this is partial because other patriotic political actors who seem to be part of this alliance with Erdogan, they continue to be supportive of him. But as far as these admirals, these retired officers are concerned, they seem to part with Erdogan.
As you mentioned, Professor, I mean, these are retired admirals. They're not on active duty. And as often is the case, and as you said, the law is weaponized by the ruling Justice and Development Party. And in this case, that's also a similar situation because 10 of the admirals have been detained and their detention period at this point has been extended, while 4 others are also under judicial control. So could the probe into the open letter lead to similar purges in the armed forces, like after the fallout with the Gülenists following the 2016 coup attempt? What kind of political gains can the government hope to gain from this crisis?
Yeah, I think that you're indicating some things that are quite important, actually, because, you know, immediately even if these admirals did anything wrong and, you know, the government is critical of it, they could be invited for interrogation and, you know, they didn't need to be detained. The reaction seems to be very harsh and very organized and almost prepared. Of course, you know, this is just interpretation, speculation. At this point, it could be that, you know, they just got organized very quickly, but there is a very harsh reaction. And so the government seems to create the appearance that, you know, there is something really very serious and the government is the victim and the admirals are guilty before even being, you know, before being tried, before being shown to be guilty of anything, that this appearance of guilt and attack against the government. So there is this very clear attempt by the government, and that, of course, raises the question whether the government is trying to gain politically from this event, even if did not. Yeah. So if there is definitely some kind of an expectation of political benefit from this. Would there be other purges within the government? So far, there is no indication of it. This may be a warning against any critical voices within the military, within the rest of the bureaucracy, or within the patriotic circles who had been supportive of the government for instrumental reasons, because ideologically they are quite different from Erdogan, the AKP, but for instrumental reasons, the Kurdish issue and some elements of the government's foreign policy, they had been supportive, and against the Gülenist, the threat that they were acting together with the government. But it seems that actually that we see this quite frequently, that the government is, aside from this warning sign against critics, it's trying to keep alive a threat perception within its base. And this, you know, of course, is to keep the base together. This has been the main strategy of the government to maintain its support. Basically, fear that, you know, there's a constant threat against Turkey, against the government, against the supporters of the government. So there's this very conscious, deliberate attempt to do this. Yet another political gain may be to drive a wedge within the opposition, because this was difficult for the opposition. This was situation quite difficult for the opposition to react to. There were different types of reactions. So dividing the opposition might be yet another expected gain. Just one last thing I could also mention, that maintain this perception of fear, the government always portrays itself as a victim, all right, is victim of something, foreign elements, or the military, or secularists, or other forces. But in this case, it is really not one of those cases that are really not so credible. So by trying to portraying itself as a victim based on the very weakly credible case, also casts a shadow of doubt on past situations where the government more credibly portrayed itself as victim. We can remember the 2008 court case to ban the party, for example, or the 2007 crisis, and others where the government seemed to be more legitimate in casting itself as a victim. But the fact that it is doing it right now, even in these current situations, really makes also past claims about victimhood less credible.
Professor, you mentioned that one of the political gains that AKP hopes to perhaps win from this crisis is to drive a wedge between the opposition. And indeed, the letter has led to a variety of divided responses in the opposition. And the one which has been spoken about quite extensively is the response of Good Party Chair Meral Akşener, where she labeled the letter as nonsense talk, for lack of a better translation. So how do you evaluate her reaction and the potential damage that it might cause her image, her alliances, and especially with her voter base?
I think it did some damage to her improving, ascending political image, because I think she needed to strike a balance between distancing herself from any coup plot, or also from the politics of the admirals, because politically what the admirals did can be criticized. Because even if you are criticizing the right things, in politics, you need to do this in a way that can bring about results. So you have to do it in alliances, you have to do it, you have to time it correctly, you have to find the right discourse that will be, that will appeal to a majority of the people in society. So in this case, politically, what the admirals did could be criticized. So she wanted to distance herself from the politics of the admirals. However, at the same time, she should also have defended them in the face of the government's ongoing authoritarianism. So the government has been very oppressive of any critiques, and by, as we said, by weaponizing the law against any people criticizing the government. So she needed to, at the same time, side with the admirals as victims of this authoritarianism, which she didn't. On the other hand, one last issue, that the adjective that she used, I think this attracted a lot of attention. This is nonsense talk, but it is actually, it's hard to translate, but it's actually more than that, because it's more pejorative term. She almost actually called them, foolish. And even if you can criticize the politics of the admirals, these are respected, very experienced military officers that served in the highest positions of the military bureaucracy of the country. And at the end, their motivations are also quite patriotic. But also, maybe most importantly, which I haven't mentioned, emphasized enough, aside from the tone of the letter, what they criticize in the letter, the Akşener should have shown some sympathy for. Because as far as the content of the letter is concerned, the admirals are criticizing two things. One, the fact that somebody took a picture of an admiral in the Navy, apparently, during a tariqat ceremony. So basically, a religious brotherhood ceremony. So now, of course, citizens have the right to be members of religious groups or to be religious, that's one thing. But on the other hand, if you're a very high level military officer, of course, any membership of these officers should be very carefully scrutinized, whether it is a radical leftist group or whether it is radical religious group. Of course, this is something that cannot be accepted. So they were very criticized that the military is really removing these controls against, for example, religious radicalism, that they may recruit religious radicals to the military. This is a very legitimate criticism. Akşener should have also supported. The second criticism that they have is that the President Erdogan seems to have started a discussion in connection with the Kanal Istanbul mega project, this Montreux Treaty on the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles Straits. So this is a very major treaty in the history of not only Turkey, but all the Black Sea basin countries. It's a very successful treaty. It is an insurance of the security of Turkey, sovereignty of Turkey, as well as the peace in the Black Sea basin. So they criticize that, they say that, and as experts, they are experts of this very issue. Many of them have been very instrumental in, in the making treaties and establishing relationships, diplomatic relationships, military relationships, keeping the peace in the Black Sea. So they criticize that the Montreux Treaty should not be discussed. It's a very, so Akşener did not actually show any support for these criticisms either. So I think in that sense, she didn't strike a successful balance between distancing herself from the politics of the admirals and supporting them as victims of authoritarianism and as legitimate critiques of major problems in the military as well as in the politics of the government. Mm-hmm. So she will need to correct that, I think.
So coming back to the content of the letter, you mentioned both the picture of the admiral as well as the actual issue, which is putting the Montreux Convention up for debate. So, I mean, Erdogan, has said that they will lay the groundwork this summer for the Kanal Istanbul project. And then if that is actually case, will the validity of the Montreux Convention really be up for the debate? I mean, how is this advantageous for Erdogan in the international arena to put this convention up for debate? How will it serve him in terms of his relationships with in the international arena?
The short and most correct answer is we don't know. Why? Because the motivation, reason, justification of this mega project, Kanal Istanbul, has never been clearly explained to the public by the government. It has been on the table since 2011. If I'm not wrong, it was the first time it was really mentioned by the government. It was 2011. Since then, there have been many legitimate criticisms of this project, environmentally, diplomatically, demographically, economically. It's not clear who will finance this project. It will be a disaster for the environment in Istanbul. And given the economic crisis in Turkey and other health crisis in Turkey and other priorities, it is really very unclear why the government is so much insisting actually on this project. It seems to be very central to its politics. Therefore, we don't know exactly what benefits Erdogan expects from this project, and also from in relation to this, from opening the Montreux Treaty to some kind of a negotiation or discussion. So we don't know, but there seems to be some expectations. There may be some individual benefits. There may be some benefits that the AKP as a political party may be getting, but it is very clear that it is not in the interest of Turkey. It is not in the interest of NATO because it would weaken the very basis of Turkey's sovereignty and security, which would not be good for NATO. It would not be good for countries of the Black Sea basin, because this is one of those rare international treaties that has been in place, accepted by all the parties since actually more than 80 years. And it has actually maintained the peace in the Black Sea. It has served the purpose. So I think it is quite mysterious. But what we need to insist on is to ask the question and to push the government to explain actually what exactly the motivation is, but not nonsensical explanations, right? Real explanations. What are how is this project going to be financed? How is this going to be to affect the environment in Istanbul? How is it going to affect the demography in Istanbul? And the Montreux Treaty. If the Montreux Treaty, I mean, who is actually who's supporting this? There have been accusations that the United States is somehow supporting a change in the Montreux Treaty. Is this true? We need to ask. The media has to ask. The Turkish public needs to ask. I don't think this is in the interest, in the long-term interest of the United States. There have been some claims that somehow China or Russia may be expecting some benefits from this. Is this true? We need to ask the Chinese embassy or Chinese government and Russia. There needs to be a discussion about this. But what seems to be very clear to me is that there is no real benefit that can result from changing the Montreux Treaty for Turkish people, for NATO, and for the Black Sea basin countries.
Professor Murat Somer, thank you so much for your assessment and for having joined us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Former People's Democratic Party MP Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu was detained at his home on April 2nd. In the hours following his forceful detention, Gergerlioğlu was hospitalized and put in intensive care. On April 3rd, he was arrested while in the hospital and taken to the Sincan prison in the capital, Ankara.
In a Twitter post, Gergerlioğlu's son Salih Gergerlioğlu said, "They came to arrest my father." Gergerlioğlu shared footage of the moment of his father's detention, which showed police officers not allowing the politician to put on his shoes and preventing him from speaking. Following his detention, Gergerlioğlu was taken to the Ankara City Hospital and put in intensive care after undergoing angiography. HDP members and Gergerlioğlu's son were not allowed to visit him the next morning when they went to the hospital. According to HDP deputy Mahmut Torul, Gergerlioğlu was taken out of the intensive care unit and taken to the prison without anyone being informed, as if he was abducted. We were not allowed to meet with the doctors and hospital officers on the pretext of weekend. We couldn't get beyond security officers despite all our efforts, he said. While we were waiting in front of the hospital, soldiers were waiting at the door, but then the teams suddenly left there. While we were waiting, he was secretly taken out. Gergerlioğlu is currently imprisoned in Ankara's Sincan prison. Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison on the charge of propagandizing for a terrorist organization on February 21, 2018, because of a social media post from 2016. The conviction was upheld by the 16th Penal Chamber of the Court of Cassation on February 19. On March 17, he was stripped of his MP duty. Gergerlioğlu refused to leave parliament premises after he was stripped of his status and started his resistance in the HDP's room. Early on March 21, police officers entered the parliament and detained Gergerlioğlu, who was in his pajamas and preparing for the morning prayers. Thousands of members of the HDP, Turkey's third largest party, have been tried as part of a years-long crackdown on the party over alleged links to the PKK. Last month, a top prosecutor moved to shut down the party, but the indictment was sent back to the prosecutor on procedural grounds.
The European Union's top two officials, European Council President Charles Michel and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, were in the Turkish capital Ankara on April 6 to pay a rare visit to President Erdogan. While human rights violations have taken on a troubling turn over the past few months, the European leaders proposed a positive agenda with Erdogan, improving customs relations, facilitating visa grants to Turkish citizens, and above all, extending the agreement regarding refugees.
The visit by the officials follows an EU summit last month, at which the bloc said work could begin on deeper trade ties and on providing more money for refugees in Turkey. Following the meeting with Erdogan, Michel and von der Leyen were asked about the Turkey's failure to implement ECHR decisions for the release of businessperson and rights defender Osman Kavala and People's Democratic Party former co-chair Selahattin Demirtaş. Von der Leyen said human rights were not a negotiable issue. Michel, on his end, stated that the rule of law and respect for fundamental rights are essential values of the EU. But asserting these values in front of the cameras did not save executives from criticism. Turkey rapporteur Nacho Amor Sanchez tweeted ahead of the visit, "Tomorrow's visit from von der Leyen and EU CEO President is of the highest standard. EU must send a political message to Turkey. If human rights doesn't get the place it deserves in the toughest crackdown in years, this will be the worst message we can send. Do values matter?" The meeting itself quickly descended into what media outlets have dubbed Sofagate. A video of the leaders showed Erdogan and Michel settling themselves into gilded chairs while von der Leyen appeared unsure of where she was expected to sit. Von der Leyen stood staring at them and said, "Ahem." Von der Leyen was ultimately offered a couch opposite to Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu. According to a statement made by Çavuşoğlu, protocol officers from Ankara and Brussels had discussed arrangements before a visit by the top officials of the European Union to Turkey, and the protocol order was arranged in line with the suggestions of the EU. EU Commission spokesperson Eric Mamer told the media on April 7 that von der Leyen was surprised by the incident, but she chose to prioritize substance over questions of form or protocol. Michel, on his end, noted the regrettable character of the situation, but that he and von der Leyen had chosen not to aggravate it with a public incident and to prioritize the substance of their discussion.
Good Party Chair Meral Akşener and Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş marked the 31st anniversary of an uprising by Uyghurs against the Chinese government, prompting the Chinese embassy in Ankara to condemn the politicians.
Akşener and Yavaş's post on Twitter made reference to the killing of Uyghurs by Chinese forces during an uprising in Baran district in April 1990, describing the events as a massacre.
"We will not remain silent about their persecution and martyrdom,"
Akşener said on Twitter. Yavaş said, "We still feel the pain of the massacre in 1990. The Chinese embassy, in turn, tagged Akşener and Yavaş in two Twitter posts, defending the country's policies and stating that the Chinese side reserves its right to a rightful response. The Chinese side determinedly opposes any person of power that in any way challenges China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and strongly condemns this," the embassy said. In turn, Ambassador Liu Xiaobin was summoned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but no further details were provided. China has come under scrutiny over its treatment of its Uyghur minority, a mostly Muslim people who speak a Turkic language. Several NGOs and countries have accused China of persecuting Uyghurs, subjecting them to various abuses in camps. Beijing rejects these accusations and maintains the camps are professional training centers against extremism. Turkey's opposition has long criticized the ruling AKP for remaining silent on China's oppression of the Uyghurs. Many of the 40,000 Uyghurs in Turkey have also been critical of the Turkish government's approach to Beijing after China approved an extradition treaty in December, which they fear may lead to them being sent back to China to face vague charges which they deny. However, the Turkish parliament has yet to ratify the agreement.
As part of the ongoing protests at Boğaziçi University, nearly 5,000 signatures have been collected from the university's alumni for a joint statement inviting the appointed rector Melih Buluh to resign. The joint statement and signatures were placed in front of the rector's office with a statement read by the representatives of the alumni. The statement read, "We request that Melih Bulu resign from office as soon as possible so that the high benefit of the public can be ensured, the institution of the university can fulfill its function in the best way possible, and a way can be paved for a participatory and democratic election."
Seslerini duyurmak isterken baskıya ve polis şiddetine maruz kalan okulumuz öğrencilerinin ve özerk üniversite taleplerini rektör atamasına ve 2 yeni fakülte kurulmasına
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.